Welcome to MyLife, Chassidus Applied, episode 197. We will talk about the contest that we just launched on Chavdal Tevis, as I announced last week. But before going to the details of that, I would like to begin by honoring this program in the honor and merit of Rabbi Yehuda Leib ben Henyechiena Denberg. His birthday is today, Chav Zayin Tevis, for Refuah Shlema, Narichas Shomim V'Shonim Tevis. Being that we are here at the conclusion of the month of Tevis, and we always begin with Leben mit der Zeit, living with the times. So let's review a few of the key dates of this week. We're in the week of Parsha Boy, the third parsha of Sefer Shmeis, second sefer from the Torah. And as I said, Chav Zayin, we're going to Chav Ches Tevis, which is the 138th birthday of the Rebbe Chana, the Rebbe's mother, who was born on the 28th of Tevis in Tov Reish Mem, in the English year of 1880. So that would make it to Tov Shin Mem would be 100, and from Mem to Ayin Ches would be another 38 years, 138 years. We'll talk about that, and as well as Chodesh Shevat, which is this week, as we just blessed the month yesterday on Shabbos. So those are the key dates that we're going to address here. And of course, in the spirit of Chassidus Applied, or in the language of the Rebbe, Teira Meloshen Heira, that everything has to be a lesson in our personal lives. Heira B'chaim, a lesson in our life. So let's begin, since tonight is Chav Ches Tevis. Start with that. As I said, in the year Tov Reish Mem, on this day, interesting, the same year the Frierdiker Rebbe was born. A few months later in Tammuz, Yud Beis Tammuz would be Frierdiker Rebbe's birthday. The Rebbe Chana was born. The Rebbe, of course, had a special chvivus, a special appreciation in general, kibbud v'eim, but we saw it in the most revealed way when the Rebbe came to America. The Rebbe went to France to greet her when she left Russia, and it was known the aggravation the Rebbe had for all those years where he couldn't do anything to help his parents. Even though in a deep Golis, and his father, Ablevi Yitzchak, passed away in Alma Ata in Golis, in Tovshin Dalet, Chof Ov. And you saw it in many of the Fabrengens, and all the Fabrengens, how he honored both his father and mother. So from a point of view of Chassidus, of the Rabbeim, our Deir Ashvi, our seventh Rebbe, the Rebbe, the special connection to his mother, honoring her also with beginning the learning of teaching of Rashi every week after her stalkus and passing in Vav Tishrei Tovshin Chav Hei, in the beginning, at the end of 1964, Tovshin Chav Hei, the Rebbe began every week, and for the years, the subsequent years, for all the years afterwards, Kamato, all the years, the Rebbe spoke every week, every Fabrengen on Shabbos, an explanation of Rashi. I mentioned a number of times that even though we never heard direct connection, but the most thing that jumps out, the connection, is because Rashi is, the hallmark of Rashi is Pshutei Shamikra. Ani leibasi elul Pshutei Shamikra, as the Rebbe would emphasize. And that was the main chiddush of the Rebbe, that was different from all the other commentaries on Rashi, and there are many, from the Mizrahi and the Sifsei Chacham and the Guraria and the Be'er Besoda and the Nachlis Yankov and so on, Maskul David, the Rebbe would cite them all, but the derech, the approach of Rashi, Pshutei Shamikra, was the Rebbe's unique approach. And as the Rebbe always says, who was the most involved at that age in the child, and who most likely learned Rashi on an ongoing basis with the Rebbe, would have been his mother. So perhaps in honoring the child, so to speak, the perpetual child that the Rebbe was, the son of the Rebbe Chana, Rashi was a way that the Rebbe honored her, and in a way that, of course, through Torah, and is something that lasts forever. The Rebbe's unique and novel and the Chiddushdik approach, on one hand, simple, pshat, but as we always know, in the pshat, you find the deepest meanings. As the Rebbe would always conclude the Rashi Sichos with the Yeno Shel Torah, the wine of Torah, Primis HaTorah, and it has Nefloisha B'Torah, as the Shalah says, Rashi. So Rashi became that type of that connection. Just like Revusa de Milsa, to mention one more thing, or one or two more things about Rebbe Chana, obviously the lesson is to us is all about what a Jewish mother is about. And when you hear the stories, how the Rebbe spoke about how the Rebbe Chana was Meser Nefesh to create ink. And they were in Golos, they had no paper and no ink, so that her husband could be able to write his Chidushei Torah. And because of that, we have today that which remains, all the Torahs that he wrote, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak, on the Zohar, on Tanya, his letters that he wrote, and other stuff, another material that he wrote, all to her honor. And the Rebbe would speak about that many times at a Vov Tisha Fabringen, the Mesiris Nefesh of a Eshes Chayil. And we know her own personal stories, that how she was dedicated even as a young girl when she was in her house. She was born to, her father was the famous Rav, the chief rabbi of Nikolaev, Rabbi Meir Shlema Yanovsky. Her mother was Rachel. She was born in Tofresh Mem, as I said. She was the oldest of 4 children. She had 2 sisters whose names were Gittel and Etel, and she had a brother who passed away at a young age, Yisroel Leib. So there are stories about how she would actually, when the Maimorim would come from the Rebbe Rashab, it used to come as a ksaviyat, as a manuscript, rewritten, she would help rewrite them so people can learn them. And many other stories, you see her dedication, of course, to the cause. And of course, we have also today the memoirs that she wrote that were recently published of literally the personal and emotional experiences. I want to just share one story that I heard from someone who was an eyewitness. So when the Rebbetzin came to America, it was in Tafshin Zayin, 1947. That's when she came out from Paris. The Rebbe went to greet her, stayed a few months in Paris to make all the arrangements, and then came back with her between Pesach and Shavuos in that year, 1947. And then she lived here till her stalkus in Vav Tishrei Tafshin Chafei. The Rebbe would visit her every day. Sometimes 6, 7 o'clock in the evening, every day he visited her. For 15, 20 minutes, poured some tea, which of course is a lesson in itself in the kibbud aim of the Rebbe's busy schedule, and the Rebbe understood very well. Yet every day he visited her. The Rebbe also tried to encourage people who knew her or knew Russian or knew the Alta Haim to go visit her as well. So one person the Rebbe suggested to go visit was Rabbi Chitrik, Hirschel Chitrik, Olav Shalom. And I heard the story from him. He said, so he tried to come, he would go visit her, but he would always try to make a time that the Rebbe's not there. But once he came and the Rebbe was there, he walked in, he knocked on the door, the Rebbe opened the door, and the Rebbe saw him. I guess the Rebbe was already leaving, or he was going to leave, and he sees the Rebbe's preparing to leave the room and said he should stay. He was ready to leave and say, I'll come back. The Rebbe said, stay. But he saw something odd. As the Rebbe was walking out of the Rebbetzins house, the Rebbetzin Chana's house, he was walking a strange way, fixing a sefer. It was not a normal way of just walking out the room. Okay, so he thought, he doesn't know the reason. Fine. Several months later, he visited her many times, but several months later, again, second time that the Rebbe was there. And this time, same thing. The Rebbe fixed a painting, arranged something, organized something, and then walked out. That time, the Rebbe Tzachana obviously saw that Rabbi Chitrik noticed. So she said to him, in Yiddish, she says, weiß nicht, als ich weiß, sind, sein Bar Mitzvah hat himmlisch gewiesen, sein Plätze. Translated, the Rebbetzin told Rabbi Chitrik that the Rebbe doesn't know that she knows that since his Bar Mitzvah, since the Rebbe's Bar Mitzvah, he never showed his back to his mother. So when he wanted to walk out of the room, he didn't want to walk out and show he's walking backwards like we walk with covet. So he arranged something and made sure it should be, so to speak, should be unobtrusive and it shouldn't be noticed. And he walked out that way. You hear a story? He never showed his back to his mother since his bar mitzvah. But the Rebbetzin was a smart woman. She knew and she noticed, but she didn't make a fuss. But here, that Vechitzik saw it, so she mentioned that. There are many beautiful stories of how when they first met the Rebbetzin and the Rebbe, after years, it would probably be from Peiches to Tafshin Zayin. So you're talking about Tzadik Ches, Tafshin Ches, almost 20 years. I don't know exactly when's the last time the Rebbe saw his parents, but let's assume it's around 1928, 27, because they left right after that, after the Tafresh Peites. Tafresh Peiches, they already left Russia after Tishrei. So it was around 20 years. They say when they first met, they embraced and did not speak for 20 minutes. So the connection, a profound one, a woman who had the schus to shape a Rebbe, a Nasi Yisroel, and we, of course, have to give tribute to that and learn our lessons from a woman of this valor, of that nature. And there's, of course, many stories that can be read. I encourage everyone to use this day, this evening, and this day to learn a few stories and read stories, or some of the things that Rebbe said and the lessons that Rebbe learned from the Rebbe Chana, and apply that to our lives. That is in the spirit of Chassidus applied. We are also in the week of Parshas Boy, as I said, as well as Chodesh Shevat. So let's talk about Chodesh Shevat. Chodesh Shevat is a date actually mentioned in the Torah and connected again to the Chassidus and the application and dissemination of Chassidus. Because Chodesh Shevat is the day, in the beginning of Sefer Devorah, it says in the first day of Chodesh HaSiri, which is the month of Shvat, Adar is the month of 11th month, and then Chodesh HaSiri is that you should Bayras HaTeira Hazes. So the beginning of Dvarim, it says on this day, the first day of the month of Shvat, doesn't say Shvat because in Teira Shabiksav the months are by number. So I'm sorry, the 11th month, because Adar is the 12th month and Nisan begins the Chodesh Chadaser. So in the 11th month, on the first day, you should begin interpreting the Torah, Bayras HaTorah. It's referring literally to Moshe being told by Hashem that now that he knew that in 27 days later it would be Zayin Adar, the Istalkus of Moshe. So Chodesh Shevat, he began to explain the Torah, and Rashi says right there, B'shivim Loshen. Didn't just explain it, because the whole Torah explains the Torah. What's the Chiddush of Chodesh Shevat? Chodesh Shevat is the interpretation of the Torah B'shivim Loshen in 70 languages, which is, of course, bringing the Torah to all the languages of the earth, even to the non-Jews as well, and to wherever Jews would go, and they would learn Torah in whatever language, whether it would be later in Babylon, and learning it in Aramaic, or as we're doing here in English, and same with all the other languages, B'shivim Lashon. And from the Rebbe always would derive from this the connection to the Frierdiker Rebbe's directive to take Chassidus and translate it in many different languages. I don't believe it's ever been translated in 70 languages, but in many languages, whether it's Spanish or French or Portuguese or Russian or Italian or Persian, it's been translated into many languages. I remember distinctly ourselves when we started producing a short version of the Fabrengen right after the Fabrengen is in Tov Shemem Zayin. So the new technologies, starting from the fax machine, allowed us to be able to distribute the sichos much quicker than the regular snail mail, as we call it today. So there was a demand to create sichos. So of course the sichos in Yiddish the Rebbe spoke, but it was translated into Hebrew, of course, and into English. And we had, I think, at one time 17 different languages we were translating it into, and including Persian, which looks like Arabic. It's a form of Arabic. And of course Russian and all the other languages I mentioned, and many more. So Bachim from those different countries would come like Sunday morning, and begin translating. Once they had the transcript that we wrote up, the original, they would then translate it into these languages. So this, for the Rebbe, indicated not just a translation, it was also a penetration of a new level of Yefutzu, of spreading Chassidus, because when you translate it, it can reach people who don't know the original language. But also, not just in language, but also when you have to translate it to another language, you have to explain it in a way that, in a different paradigm, so someone can understand it. So in many ways, it's the original form of Chassidus applying Chassidus through these different languages, through the different paradigms and idioms that you use when you explain an idea. I was zeichet to write the book Toward a Meaningful Life, and to date, that's also been translated into 12 languages. And these languages, as I said, are not just a literal translation. You have to actually adapt to the culture and to the style and language that speaks to the people in that place. You don't change the content. The integrity of the original remains the same. But when Moshe Rabbeinu Bayras HaTorah, but he was able to create that ability to bring Torah to the entire world. And it's always connected to Chodesh Shevat, because the Chodesh Shevat leads us to Yud Shvat, which is, of course, the Yom Stalkus of the Frierdiker Rebbe and the beginning of the Nesius of the Rebbe. We'll talk about that when we get closer next week to Yud Shvat. But Rosh Chodesh Shvat is the beginning. Rosh Chodesh is the beginning, the Rosh of the entire month. So with emphasis also of spreading Chassidus in every possible way and reaching every type of person. And as the Rebbe says, Chutza, Yefutza menesecha chutza, chutza shein chutza memen. to the outskirts, to the farthest outskirts that can't even be further, which means both in quantity and in quality, people who are either very far away from the source because they didn't either hear the Rabbeim directly and they live in places that they never had direct connection, or farther in content that their life and their education is one that they have not yet merit to be able to hear Chassidus. So chutzah means in all possible ways. So of course, 70 languages represents literally bringing it to every particular area and place in the world, which is what we see with shluchim. The Rebbe is sending shluchim to every corner of the earth, every language literally, every possible language. And what do they do when they teach? They teach in the language of the country. The Alter Rebbe in Mishpatim, Tere'er Mishpatim, explains the bitter of Lashenis, in a beautiful way, the refinement that is achieved when you explain Torah in different languages. The Rebbe speaks about it as well. He brings it in many different sichos. So that's the lessons from Chodesh Shevat. And finally, Boy, many things about Boy. Boy is, of course, the parsha that begins with Golus and ends with Geula. Because the middle of the parsha is the day, Be'etzem Hayom Hazeh, when finally comes the day when Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu that this is going to be the day of the Yetzias Mitzrayim. So it's interesting. You think thematically, you finish a chapter with Golus, like the end of Va'era, and then begins a chapter with Geula. No, in the middle of the chapter in Boy, while we're reading it, suddenly everything reverses. And after the 210 years that we talked about in Shmoyis and Va'era, where there's primarily not about any Geula, it's Moshe's efforts, but it's still deep Golus. In Boy, you have both. And one of the reasons for that is because, as the Rebbe explains, Golus is only a step to Geula. So you want to make the emphasis, it's not just two stages. It is two stages, but they're woven together in one chapter. And that's why the whole Sefer of Shmos is called Sefer HaGeula. Even the first chapters which still talk about Golus, because you read it Tzedek Aliyah, it doesn't just mean the descent is in order to bring the ascent, but the descent is part of the ascent. You just don't see it at the time. So in other words, going through what they went through ends up becoming part of the journey to reach the highest, greatest places. And that's what happens in Parsha Boy. The word boy as well is an oddity. The Zohar asks the question, cited very often by the Rebbe, boy, the question being, it should have said, Lech al Pari, go to Pari. Why say come to Pari? Come and suggest that something is there, come. So the Zohar says that Moshe Rabbeinu, at that point, we already had dealt with 7 makas, and now he's going into the deeper klippas, the deeper inner sanctum of the darkness, the heart of darkness, the belly of the beast, of Tanin Hagodol, the beast being the great dragon or the great serpent called Pari. And it says that Moshe began to tremble. He was afraid because he saw the formidable power of this Pari. So Hashem, realizing that he's afraid, Hashem says, don't say go. He says, come. I'm going with you. Come with me. Of course, the tremendous lesson that the Eber goes with every person all the time. Shkocha Pratis is the idea Hashem Tzadigav, God leads our footsteps. But there are times, special times, when we may need extra kayach, extra power, either because we're facing a daunting challenge or a formidable situation that we can sometimes feel, even Moshe Rabbeinu can feel tentative or hesitant. So the Eber says very clearly, boy, come with me, I'm going with you. And when Moshe heard that, he went in Idrin, Bosser Idrin, chamber into chambers, into the deepest places, and that's where he transformed Pari, ultimately with Makas Pcheres. Pari himself was a Bchar, which struck to the heart of Pari. But he did that with the Kayach. Now, sometimes you don't have to emphasize that. The Eber goes, and he says, go. I'm also with you. But sometimes we need to know that, and in the context of our own translating it into our own lessons in life, we all have the Pari that we have to face at times, the Pari, the king, the leader of Mitzarim Ugvulim, which is the root of all our constraints and inhibitions and fears and insecurities, and all the other words you can use to identify the things that keep you trapped. And the Pari Melech Mitzrayim is the king of that, like you're dealing with that, so you can feel quite frightening, it can be quite formidable and quite overwhelming. So we're told, boy, Hashem goes with the Moshe Rabbeinu in each one of us, as he says in Tanya Perik Membeis, each one of us has a Moshe within us. And Hashem goes with that Moshe, you can overcome any challenge that we face. So we go out into this world in the chutzah, with the Shivim Lashon, where we have to go to a world that's a hostile world, and initially is not receptive. we go not alone. We go with the keiches, we go with the powers of the Eberster and of course the Meshaleach, and the Meshaleach who sent the Rebbe, the Shliach. So the Meshaleach, the Shliach of the Eberster, which is our Meshaleach, and it goes with us, and we can deal with any particular keach as mitzugibun eben. When you're tied above, you don't fall below. Okay. So now that we've covered that, let me go into a few more comments. Let me again encourage everyone. We've launched the 4th annual MyLife Chassidus Applied Essay Contest. To go to meaningfullife.com/contest. You can get all the details, the guidelines, and I don't have enough words to encourage and tell you that every person is capable of winning, because we made the guidelines in a way that creates a level playing field, because it's not just understanding an inyan or idea in Chassidus, but it's applying it to a life situation. And that, in that case, every one of us has that ability to do that, because we all have life situations. So you have to personalize it and take something where Chassidus has affected or could affect, and you're allowing it to affect your personal life. So I encourage you again. The contest has been launched officially, and the contest is running from now till Rosh Chodesh Adar, February 16th. It's a Friday, Rosh Chodesh Adar, 11:59 a.m. And we will announce the winners shortly after that, approximately around Yud Aleph Nisan. So we've got a few questions that came in about the contest. And if you have any comments or questions you'd like to ask, the guidelines are pretty comprehensive, but you could always send an email. You'll see it all on that landing page. Again, meaningfullife.com/contest. So someone writes, why is there a chance of winning the essay when there have been thousands of essays submitted and my topic has probably been already exhausted? The answer is very straightforward. There are a number of people that sometimes write on a similar topic. Trag gut wird sein gut is a very popular topic. And yet, there's different ways to write it, because it's just like when you play music. You can play it in a more beautiful way, someone can play it in a less beautiful way. So firstly, so even if there's a topic you may have covered that you feel others may cover, that doesn't take away, it's not being judged in a way that since it's covered already, we don't read the essay. The judges will read every essay, and they will merit on the merits of that essay, mark it by the point system, and seeing whether it fulfills the guidelines, which is why I encourage everyone, read those guidelines. One of the things I've noticed personally, and I looked at it, so many excellent essays were written, but for some reason, either because of rushing or whatever it is, if you just finish the essay, besides showing it to someone or a few people, go through the guidelines and say, did I fulfill all the guidelines? I've seen essays with another 20 minutes or half hour of work could have gotten much higher scores and even may have been winners. And the only thing was missing, they didn't follow the guidelines. We must have guidelines, because when you have many in a competition, it's not just the quality of the essay. Everybody's following those guidelines. So if one person follows them, a person doesn't, we have to use that as our yardstick to be able to measure. So it's a simple thing. When you finish it, just make sure. Go through with the checklist, literally. Do I have this piece covered? Do I have this piece covered? Because it is being evaluated by these guidelines. And in the guidelines itself, you can have people follow the guidelines, and then there's the better ones, and there's considered the ones get a higher score than others. So that's a tremendous, critical component here. So absolutely, thousands of essays could be submitted, and your topic may have been exhausted. I wouldn't say exhausted. You're taking a topic, like I just mentioned, Trag gut wird sein gut is a topic, but there's so many ways to apply it. People deal with it all the time. We have real life situations where this theme and this idea in Chassidus is useful and it affects us. And I could see hundreds, if not thousands of ways applying that principle. And secondly, no one ever writes exactly the same. People write it in different ways, how they explain it, how they apply it, and so on. Another person writes, in last week's show, when you mentioned the essay contest, you said the deadline is... I don't know if it was a slip of the tongue. In any case, it's worth mentioning, as I'm sure you know, that the Rebbe was very particular in positive language. For example, instead of Beis Chelim, which means the house of the sick, meaning in Hebrew the word for hospital, he called it Beis Reifim, of refuah, a house of healing, a house of doctors. Joseph Telushkin, in his book Rebbe, when writing about a topic of the Rebbe's positive speech, he writes that as a result of learning the Rebbe's view on positive speech, instead of using the word deadline, he now uses the word due date, which has the connotation of birth. I just thought it'll bring it to your attention. Thank you very much for bringing it to my attention. Excellent point. And as a matter of fact, I actually helped Rubashkin write that chapter because I gave him a few stories and a few sources. So yes, we all have our, I don't know if it's called slip of the tongue. I probably didn't pay attention. It's a line we use, but deadline has the implication of dead. Due date is a much better word. Like I think I mentioned a few weeks ago about about the custom of the land, which is when you have a birthday cake, on your birthday they give you candles and you blow them out. And then one little girl pointed out, you don't blow out candles, we don't blow out, we light candles. A candle is a symbol of life, a symbol of Ner Hashem Nishmas Adam. So the same thing here, point well taken. And the due date is February 16th, 11:59 a.m. So I stand corrected, and I thank you for pointing that out. And again, this essay contest is open to everyone. $10,000 first prize, $3,600 second prize, $1,000 third prize. And this year we've opened a new track just for students, age 14 to 21. Only students can win this, the fourth $500 prize, but the students are also eligible to win the higher prizes as well. So this is a shout out to educators out there of all sorts, whatever school it is, or educators, private tutors, and as well as parents. One of the ways we educate is through giving our students assignments. An assignment, write a paper. Here's an opportunity to write a paper, an essay, based on Chassidus, applying it to life, and plus the incentive of $10,000. To me, it's a no-brainer. So I encourage anyone that is teaching or anyone responsible for children or for students, and I say to parents as well, it's a shout out to parents as well. What better nachas can you have in these days coming from Chavdala Tevis, going to Yud Shevat, to have your children, whatever age it may be, when they're capable of doing it, to actually write and help them, encourage them, give them sources and support it, and having a prize that you don't even have to give the prize. You can always give them an additional prize. But here you have that. So to me, it sounds like a given that everyone should use this opportunity, and that's exactly why we're doing it, without any strings attached. It's a gift to anyone writing these essays, and we wish that everybody participates. We wish there'd be thousands and thousands and thousands of submissions. There'll be more news coming about the contest as we are developing different ideas. So stay tuned, and we will talk about them. And again, meaningfullife.com/contest. With that said, let us go to a few questions. In this MyLife program, we'll talk a little about Ahavas Yisroel. How can we be expected to love every person? Rabbi Jacobson, thank you for your excellent broadcasts, which are such a great help to so many people. My question is about Ahavas Yisroel. We all know the basic mitzvah to love a fellow as we love ourselves. It doesn't just say to love a fellow, it says kamoicha, like yourself. Meanwhile, Hashem created the world in such a way that each person likes some people more than others. And in fact, it's human nature to dislike certain people. You can't like everyone, the saying goes. Moreover, most people have a best friend or a few very close friends that they especially love. And we thank Hashem and appreciate that we have these people to be close to. Actually, the fact that there are people we don't like makes us appreciate our good friends even more. Meanwhile, we have this mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel, and I'm trying to understand how to grow in it. If I dislike someone, if I'm irritated by their behavior or opinions, but I treat them decently, would do a favor for them, and never say Lashon Hara about them, I believe I'm keeping the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel. But the fact that I dislike them makes me feel bad. I'm even dan l'kav schus, which means I look and find merit in them, on them for their behavior and opinions, trying to understand why they are the way they are. But often that doesn't make me feel any differently toward them. Moreover, there are certain people that are not a good influence on me, and it's best for me not to spend time around them. So I avoid them. The Rebbe even addresses this in at least one sikh, I think, about Pirkei Avos, harchek mishachen ra, to distance yourself from a bad neighbor. I don't do anything against them, but it doesn't feel like I have Ahavas Yisroel toward them. Recently, for a mitzvah, for a full shlema for someone, a person suggested tolerating someone you can't usually tolerate. Is this an improvement in Ahavas Yisroel? If so, how? How do I make peace with my negative feelings towards certain people? Or am I supposed to make peace with them at all? Maybe my feelings don't matter. How does a person grow in Ahavas Yisroel? Very good. Very good question. Very practical question. And of course has been addressed. I haven't addressed, I don't know if I addressed exactly this context, but I did address in episode 74, 103, and 127. I'm cross-referencing because when you go to meaningfullife.com, you find all the archives and other resources, including the essays, as I mentioned, the contest is all there. So we have discussed related topics. Let me address this question directly. Let's broaden the question by asking a few other questions. We know Adam Karev Eitz Latzmei, as you alluded to. A person loves themselves more than everything else. And that's how we're created. So how could you actually really love another like yourself? Kamoicha. As I said, it doesn't just say v'ahavta recha. It says kamoicha. It's seemingly not the nature of a human being to love someone as they love themselves. And as you point out, how could you say such a mitzvah when there are people that we don't like? Let's say you meet someone that does that seems very negative. The Maggid asks another question. He asks the question, he says, how could you command and regulate love? You could tell somebody to give tzedakah. You can tell someone to invite guests, even if you don't like the person. But v'ahavta is the mitzvah to love. How do you regulate an emotion? If you don't love, you don't love. You do love, you do love. How do you tell somebody to love someone that when they don't feel the love? So he answers the question, the same question about Hashem, v'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, that the mitzvah is under his bonus. The mitzvah is to contemplate on things that bring you to love. Like the Rambam says, Keitzid Yaveh, how does a person arrive to love and awe of God? By contemplating on the world, on the universe, seeing greatness of God, seeing the grandeur, seeing how God helps us, seeing how God sustains us, appreciating it. And that brings love. So of course, Chassidus has the question, and the mitzvah should have said, Lizbeinen, to contemplate. So Chassidus says, no, when you contemplate, automatically it brings an emotion. And that's the heart of the real Chiddush, which is another question. The Baal Shem Tov, we say, is Chodesh, the Inyan of Ahavas Yisroel, is one of the foundations of the Baal Shem Tov. What do you mean? Rabbi Akiva said, Zeh klal gadol b'teirav after recha kamecha, thousands of years before that. Why do we say something? The cornerstone of Chassidus, one of the cornerstones is Ahavas Yisroel. That Alter Rebbe has a whole Perek Lamed Beis, Perek Lev, Perek Love, Perek Heart, Lamed Beis, that talks about it. So the answer is, the mitzvah is there, but what Chassidus comes to teach is how to access it even when you don't feel it. And when you contemplate and realize that a person has a neshama, and that neshama is a chelik elikam mal mamish, a divine piece of the divine, and created b'tselem elikim. So it's true on the surface level, there may be a person that you may not like. And there may be their personality things that actually don't deserve to be liked. Whatever reason, it just may be unpleasant person. There is such a thing. But the neshama is never unpleasant. So the Alter Rebbe says, Ahavas habrias, he's medayik the word brias. It says, Hava mitalmidim shel Adon, be from the students of Adon, and love the brias. What does brias mean? Say, Ahavas ha'adam, Ahavas b'nei adam. Brias means creatures, creations. That even if you feel brias ba'alma, you don't see any other quality except the fact that God created that person, that's enough reason. Because it's an extension of loving God. That's how we have to look at it. So, therefore, that is how we work on Ahavas Yisroel and growing Ahavas Yisroel. Again, that doesn't mean that only they become your best friend. Obviously, you can't have the whole world as your best friend. There are people we gravitate to, people we associate with, people who understand us, or we understand them, some certain common people. But Ahavas Yisroel sometimes comes easily for some people, with some people. Sometimes it comes that you have to dig deeper and say, this person is an neshama of Hashem. Why did God put them on this earth? So what you're introducing is the soul element. That's what Chassidus and the Baal Shem Tov came to introduce. And that is absolutely everyone is capable of doing. Contemplating, which will automatically bring a feeling. Now, you could say, what about criminals in prison? Or people who've really done something cruel? Even them we're supposed to love. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be in prison. If they're a danger to others and they've done something wrong, they need to be disciplined. But it still means that there's a neshama that they have. And even when the Mitzrayim were drowning, Hashem was saying to the Malachim, why are you singing praise? These are my creatures. So we cry that they had to drown because there was no choice. So even then, We're not celebrating, we feel sad that God's creatures could fall to such a low place. So it's a general attitude of looking at everything from the divine perspective, and when you do, you see the positive, you can find the positive in every person. Halemed B'Kol Adam, you learn something from every person, and you see, there's the language in Yem Yem and other places brought to be things we learn from a ganef even, a thief. A thief is a person who's breaking the Torah. Yet there's lessons to be learned. Again, this is not necessarily the same day of Ahavas Yisroel to that thief, but I mean to say that you can find the positive in everything, and that doesn't justify their negative behavior. You're looking for the neshama, which is there by every person, and in that sense, everybody is capable of being loved. As I said, some people you need a lot more work. It's a famous story with the Rebbe Rashab, where he was the Frierdiker Rebbe. He told the Frierdiker Rebbe, look, the Gemara says that you're supposed to have compassion for everyone. It's only an example, because Rachim is not necessarily Ahavas Yisroel, but Rachmanis. But Chutz min HaSheitan, you're supposed to have Rachmanis, compassion for everyone except for a fool. So Rebbe Rashab said, Nu zeh, wie viel Rachmanis man darf haben auf Azav, was the Torah sagt, damit uns haben kein Rachmanis auf ihm. Look how much compassion you need for a person that the Torah itself says you shouldn't have compassion for him. What's he saying? He's defying what the Gemara says. He's saying no. He's saying you're not supposed to have compassion because you're not supposed to empower or enable him or respect his shtus, his narishkeit. But it still doesn't mean that you hate him. It means you have compassion for the fact that he doesn't, that the Torah is saying you shouldn't have compassion for him. So every person is capable of being loved in that sense. As I said, yes, it's a mitzvah, and a mitzvah means you sometimes have to work on it. There's our best friends that we love naturally, you don't have to work on it comes easily. But the mitzvah is up for everybody, and knowing also one more additional point, as the Alter Rebbe hints to, and the Tzemach Tzedek, in the mitzvah of Ahavas Yisroel, in Derech Mitzvah Secha, speaks about how we're, from the Arizal, how we're all one large organism. All human beings, all Jews. That's why we say Hareini, Mekabel Alai Mitzvah Sesem in the beginning of that, before davening, because tefillah is like a korban, and a korban, you can't be a Baal Mum. You can't be in any way have any any defect or any injury to your being when you bring an offering. So when you're going to daven, if you don't include all the eden and we're all one body, then a part of you is missing. It's like missing an organ, God forbid, or a limb, some compromise to your entity. So is it possible not to like someone that's part of you? You'll say, I don't like my left finger. I don't like my right hand. I don't like my leg. So we come to understand that everything has a role to play. Now, does it mean that you love your heel the same way you love, let's say, your brain? No, but it's part of who you are. And it's part of God's divine plan and cosmic plan, so we're all part of one organism, as the Yerushalmi says. That just like it's not possible that a right hand should hit a left hand, God forbid, autoimmune type of diseases where the body turns on itself is the worst possible thing, to realize we're all part of one big picture. And then, it's not even capable. How could you not like something that's part of you that you need, complements you, and you complement it? In continuing this, another question similar, not similar, but related. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, often I hear stories about conflicts that happen between Misnagdim and Chassidim, and more specifically the one about 19th Kislev when the Alter Rebbe said that the 3 hours at Misnagdim's house was harder than the 53 days he was in prison. How to reconcile that with one of the main messages of Chassidus, and specifically Chabad Chassidus, that teaches the importance of Ahavas Yisroel to any type of Jew. Thank you very much in advance. Keep up with the wonderful work. I refer you as well to episode 154, where I discussed something similar. And it's a good question, because you see these jokes people make, and you even see Chassidim, Grace Chassidim, dismissed Misnagdim. I remember once giving a talk, and I made a joke about a Misnagdim and a Chassid. So someone got up at the end of the talk and said, your talk was excellent. You love everyone. Even people who have completely not connected, because they all are the divine creatures and God blessed them all with a soul and so on. Except Misnagdim. Because I said that joke, it was like a dismissive joke. And I said, you're 100% right. But now that I think about it, it was not personal. We're not talking about an individual. There's an archetype. Every one of us, even a chassid, has a misnagid within him. And every misnagid has a chassid within him. It's an archetype. And sometimes when you laugh at something, I'm not talking about, God forbid, litzonis, where you're laughing at someone. But when you're dismissing or you're like so-called critical of a certain archetype, Absolutely not personalize it. You look at yourself and say, I have a quirk inside of me that can be something that needs repair. So absolutely, personalizing is Ahavas Yisroel. But to talk about an archetype, a certain type of thing, like we all have that certain, you talk about sometimes a person is extremely abstinent in a certain way, or they have another feature, another quirk. So in that context, that's how I would explain it, especially when you read Tanya, and get us a Chodesh, Simon Beis, that the Alter Eber wrote when he came out of Peterburg, which is out of prison. He said, "Lo lisrik aleim chas v'shalom." Do not gloat, even though there were those that wanted the Alter Eber to be in prison, and he was informed upon. The Alter Eber said, even though we have now been freed, don't gloat, lo lisrik, don't whistle at them, don't dismiss them, don't be condescending and say, hey, don't taunt them. And that is part of that. Do not, in the fall of even your enemies, do not rejoice. You have to be humble. Is the name of that letter. I've been humbled by all the Chassidim that you did for me, that God does for me. So it should always bring out humility, and humility always brings out deeper love, because it's never, God forbid, in an arrogant form. Okay. Next question. Perfectionism versus depression. What can I do by being a perfectionist? Hi, Rabbi Jacobson. I listen to you from Argentina every week and enjoy your shiurim. I have a problem that I'm very perfectionist with myself. Every time I make a mistake, I get depressed and leave for a while all the good things I am doing. For example, every day I learn Chassidus, but if for a day I don't learn, then I stop learning for a while. What can I do to change? Thanks. And here I refer you also to episode 115. Over 197 episodes, you can imagine there's a lot of overlap. That's why I do the cross-referencing. And I should mention here, again, take the opportunity that when you look at the previous episodes, the programs, in the archives, if you go to the YouTube, you'll have in the description timestamps that you can just listen to the topic you want to hear. You don't have to listen to the whole hour or hour and 15 minutes. Okay, very good question. The key to this is like the key to everything that Chassidus teaches us. It's not about you. The Torah says, and the Rambam brings the end of Hilchas Devorah, the end of Hilchas Me'ilah, that minatev, that when we bring something for the Eber, it should always be from the best. Truma, Bikurim, the Beis Hamikdash. You should not take, when you have, let's say, a selection, bring the best, minatev or minayofa, from the best and the most beautiful for God. Because it demonstrates that you value it. You take the most valuable and you offer that to Hashem. That's the perfect offering, so to speak. But that's because you're valuing, not because you're a perfectionist, that's because Hashem, God, is the most important thing possible. So how do you express, when you really love someone, you give them the best. You don't give them the second best, you don't give them the third best, you give them from the first. B'char, that's the whole idea of B'char. The firstborn, the first bikurim, the first fruit. Every morning, Maida'ani, the first breath, you give to Hashem. Key thing is not to focus on yourself, to focus on that I want to do something beautiful. Zek keli vanveyu, a beautiful mezuzah, a beautiful sefer Torah, a beautiful home. Dir noah marchiv v'daita shalodem, a beautiful home expands a person's mind. Why? Not because you want it, because you're serving with it. You're serving a cause that's higher than yourself. So you're making it the most beautiful Shabbos table. The problem you're describing is that it becomes an perfectionism of your yesh. That I need to feel perfect. I need to feel complete. And if it's not perfect, you get depressed. The first one, you'll never get depressed. You do the best you can. You bring it to God. God says, be the best. Give me the best you can. I'm not looking for you to give me the perfect. It's not about you. When perfectionism becomes an expression of who you are, and it's your yeshus always leads to negative things. So the way to deal with it is simply ask yourself, why are you trying to be a perfectionist here exactly? For what, whom? What are you trying to prove? Often it's actually a result of insecurity. A person, for example, has been criticized a lot, and they don't feel secure, and they feel they always needed to do more because their parents were critical or others were critical. They need to please. So that's not coming from a good place. That's coming from an insecure place. So you feel you have to always, you're never good enough. And the best proof is that when you don't do it right, you right away get depressed and don't end up doing anything. That means it's not coming from a healthy place. That's the work you need to do, is to discover you be perfect for healthy reasons. Not perfect. Be as good as you can be for good and healthy reasons. And when it's not that, it didn't work out as well as it could be, You did your best, you move on. And if you didn't do your best, so next time you try better. It's in a balanced way and a healthy approach to the whole idea. Another thing they say is that the enemy of good is perfect. When people do something and they say, you know what, I'm not going to release a book or I'm not going to do the project until it's perfect. Ends up happening, you end up having nothing. I remember when the Rebbe said they give a Heirah directive to print before Yutes Kislev, I'm not sure what year it was, maybe Tavshim Mem Beis, Mem Gimel, Mem Daled. So the Rebbe then said to make a Mafteches index on all the Alter Rebbe's Maimorim. And the Rebbe also participated. And actually in the back, there's a list of everyone that did it. And when they put the Rebbe's name on top, the Rebbe moved his name in the alphabetical order. So his name, Menachem Mendel Ben Chana, is in the order, an Aleph Beis, in the list of everyone else. So they said that to have it out for you, Tes Kislev, simply it's a Mafteach. An index needs real good proofreading, because a page number that's wrong, it's one thing in a book, you make a mistake, you could usually figure out a letter is a typo. But in a Mafteach, an index, it's so much more pronounced, because the page numbers are wrong, the whole Mafteach is worthless. So the Rebbe said, so they said to the Rebbe, if we had more time, we'll be able to do a better job. The Rebbe said, no, to have it out Yutes Kislev, and then afterwards edit it, and give out a second Madura, give out a book of corrections, or a new version, a new edition. Because Rebbe understood if you're going to go for perfection, you'll end up never doing anything. So the enemy of good is perfect, not bad. The enemy of you think the enemy of perfect is bad? No, the enemy is good. And do as best as you can with what you have right now, and then you can always improve on that. Okay. Now, what to do to change? You usually probably will need someone to talk to, like a bashpia, and case by case. Next time you think you're not doing something perfect, talk it through to someone. Let them calm you down and realize you don't have to excel in every detail. And most importantly, to discover the reasons you want to excel. If you want to excel on behalf of a higher reason, then it shouldn't make you feel bad when you don't do it, because it's not about you. If it's about you, then that's what you need to work on. Okay. Next question. Dealing with an irritable wife is the title. But I think the topic is a little off, not really exactly that, but let's read it. Dear Rabbi Jacobson, I have been greatly perturbed about a subject matter for a while, and I have decided to ask for your guidance. My wife is a very nice, selfless person who uses her strength to raise our kids. She does have a very strong personality, seeing things very black and white. When she sees something is wrong in her perspective, she's very strongly repulsed by it. While those matters that she finds not to be that serious, she has very blah feelings towards. What's the big deal? This leads to her using strong words like evil, Rosh, Gehenim, etc., for those she finds to have done wrong by her or to others. And to matters in halacha and hashkafa that are not seemingly super important in her mind, is to be viewed very parav, often to my chagrin. As for her strong streak, quote unquote, while standing up for what is right is very admirable, and I find that our frum society sometimes has a tendency to poo-poo serious matters, I feel her midas are out of line. This leads to not only her strong words to others, but as well to me, her husband, when she does not like something I do or not do. She often cuts straight to my past, various deficiencies, and uses terms I am embarrassed to think about others, let alone say. I often am left deflated and depressed. Being as she is an active leader of the house, it is quite easy for her to then claim I am the lazy husband, as I close up for the evening with my despair after a few good ribbings, or after several mean texts throughout the day at work. I am nonchalantly told a task to do on the way back. I wanted to know what Chabad Chassidus has to say in regards to disagreeing with your wife in matters of halacha and midas. Is it the husband's lot to just deal with his wife as is, taking her behavior as a sign of his own flaws? Or is there a valuable way to tell one's wife that despite her great attributes, there are certain things needed fixing? For example, not to tell her negative opinions of me to my kids, or in a semi-public setting. And for example, to be insistent that the kids wash negelvasa prior to eating or doing other morning activities. Thank you so much for your classes, and for the very least letting me put my words down to ease my burden. I read this because we talk about this, the issues of life that people address, and I'm very say honored, but it's good to hear that people are open, because that's how you begin to solve problems. But at the same time, of course, you have to always realize that it's very difficult to answer a question like this without the people sitting in front of you. Because firstly, there's always two sides to every story. The husband's view, the wife's view. As they say, there's three sides to every story. The husband's perspective, the wife's perspective, and the true perspective. Not because anyone's necessarily being malicious, but because we're subjective. We see things a certain way. And so that's number one. Number two, even if you know the people, it's hard to talk about it in this theoretical way, because it is ultimately case by case. Because you want to solve the issue. You don't just want to give platitudes of answers that are just general and generic. Not yet, as I always say, I'll try my best to try to say a few key lines. And I think they're pretty obvious, but sometimes have to be spelled out. No human being on earth is perfect. No one. Talked before about perfection. Everyone has their flaws. So when there's a marriage, a good marriage doesn't mean that both couples are perfect, or one of them is perfect. It means that they're partners, and they're both wise enough and mature enough to understand that sometimes we complement each other. Sometimes one person has a strength the other one doesn't have. Sometimes one has a weakness the other doesn't have. When is it not a problem? When both understand that, and you can address an issue that in a nice, gentle way. Now, obviously, there are times we always can be very disturbed by someone, especially close to us, because you take for granted. It's not like you, with someone, a stranger, you're going to be more careful what you say. In a home, in a comfortable home, people are going to speak up and sometimes say things that are offensive. So what do you do with that? You have to find a way to communicate with each other about that issue and say, I want to sit down with you. I want to tell you that I think that what you said yesterday was offensive. Or what others are able to do with a little bittle, you just get over it and don't say anything. That really depends what was said and whether it should be. Sometimes some things have to be overlooked. Because you have to look at the whole package, not at a detail. You're building a home. You have children. You have family. You're looking at the whole package. Is the whole package a healthy package? Then there may be here there things that are not. So you have to know how to ride and transcend them. If the whole life is suddenly being overtaken by negative energy and everything seems negative, then you're going to have to go speak to somebody, a third party. So again, I don't know the extent here. Here it doesn't sound that it is that extent, because it seems like you speak very beautifully about your wife and say good things about her. But there seems to be, she's strong-headed in certain areas, black and white. And again, I don't know how you react to that and what you do with it. Do you just swallow it all? Do you fight with her about it? And what happens the other way around? Does she see you strong-headed? As I said, these are things I don't have answers to. So overall, my response is that that's the general healthy approach. Now, if you indeed establish that there's a certain midah that disturbs you, and it's a midah that's also destructive to your children and so on, so there's a few ways to go. Sometimes the best way is not directly, because sometimes husband and wife talk about things directly, it's too close for comfort. Sometimes it may be through a friend, if there's someone that's close like that. Sometimes you could talk about it. Now, if a person's usually, you're going to tell your wife, you talk to the children about me negatively, most likely she will either say, it's not true, or I was just telling them things that don't make you look bad because I was just pointing out something. So you're going to get into a vicious cycle. He said, she said, I did speak negative, did not speak. You have to know where there's a benefit. Even if something disturbs you, you have to know what's the best way to approach it. Do you overlook it? Do you address it? And how do you address it? So that's how I would put it in a framework. If indeed it's something that needs to be addressed, and you talk about things like things she takes very serious about herself, and then other things she dismisses, we all have that. We all have things that we consider important and not that important to someone else. I think it comes down to communication, and you may need, between the two of you, and you can bring up issues in a pleasant way. I would never bring them up in the moment, be'idna derischa, meaning in the moment when there's the frustration or there's anger. I would wait when there's a calm time and just have a conversation that's not attacking and doesn't require anyone becoming defensive. If that doesn't work, then the option may be maybe both of you sit with someone else. Or ultimately, if that all doesn't work and it doesn't affect the whole package, then maybe something you just have to overlook, even though it may be considered relatively important. That's how I would answer this. And what Chassidus says in regards to disagreeing with your wife, Chassidus says that we have to be healthy people. Healthy people does not mean that you have to be preaching and demanding of your wife and telling her what to do, nor she to you. It means there's a menschlichkeit, there's a bittel that you show to each other, or respect to each other. And that's what's demanded. If you see something that needs to be dealt with, you have to remember you're both in it together. It takes two to tango, and you have to address it in that fashion. To say to just swallow everything, accept everything, no, some things that should not be accepted if it's really a problem. Something should be overlooked. And that again has to be determined case by case. Here I don't have enough details to really say more than what I've said till now. So I hope this was helpful. And above all, let me say this. There's three partners in a marriage. There's God, and there's the husband, and there's the wife. As I said, when you have bittel, the Gemara says, Eish, the Yud of the Ish, the Hey of the Isha, creates Shalom. When you don't have the divine in there, then people's personality becomes more powerful. So then you don't have the big picture. Then it becomes me and you. And was it going to be my way or your way? You want to have the element of knowing that there's a chuppah that always hovers above every marriage, which is the makif, that equalizes both two halves of one Selam Elikim, and with an intention of both together working on something. Now, some people in marriages do have issues. Their spouses, sometimes the man, sometimes the woman, sometimes the husband, sometimes the wife, that may actually need to work something through. They grew up in a home where there was a lot of criticism, let's say, or other type of abuse, and that may affect how they're behaving in this. What you describe here sounds a bit of a person who may have that type of attitude. So they're very strong about what they believe in, and other things don't matter to them because they need to have a sense of control. Now, if that's indeed the case, as I said, if it's big enough, then maybe you do need to go to a professional, talk to someone, or a mashpia, or a rav, or a professional, and address it. But overall, the attitude that we have Hashem as our partner, and we're building a house like that, and Shabbos comes, and Shabbos LaHashem, Shabbos Kodesh, and that's the dominating factor, more than the personalities, is one of the key things that's necessary from the point of view of Torah and Chassidus that makes marriages work. Okay. The next question is something about depression and anxiety. I had one respectful comment about your Instagram account. Instagram is one of the social media where we post different pieces. I was troubled by the advice on the video that depression and anxiety are signs of a spiritual lack. For example, at one time I was depressed and it turned out to be low thyroid. My husband was anxious after a stroke and benefited from medication. People who have these disorders can be at risk and should also be told to get a checkup. I'm not discounting the spiritual side of it, but suggest that there be a disclaimer of some sort. I put things like that on my website when necessary. Okay. Which another way of questioning is anxiety and depression a spiritual malady? So I believe when I spoke about this in this program in the episodes 4, 58, 93, and 139, I make that qualification very clear. There was clinical depression where absolutely maybe medication may be needed, other interventions that are medical, just like if a person has a calcium deficiency or insulin deficiency, they need a doctor. And nitn reshus l'reif l'rap is we have doctors for this reason. However, you do find in Chassidus the concept of atzvus, Tanya, the concept of depression or anxiety that is not medical per se. Now, to clarify, to make sure, you have to obviously have a person suffering from anxiety, they should definitely go see a doctor. But there is the element that it is a spiritual malady. It's the soul not getting what it needs. Or, as he explains in Tanya when he speaks about atzvus, it's a person whose Yetzer Hara is making you feel depressed in order not to allow you to serve. So it weakens you. It's like he says there, like in a battle, that you feel weakened and demoralized. Demoralization not coming from necessarily anything medical. Something you could fight by feeding your soul, by building the confidence necessary that you can fight. So therefore, the qualification absolutely must be made. But at the end of the day, the anxiety can very much be a strictly spiritual malady, of a spiritual lack. Just like your body tells you when it's hungry, anxiety tells you that your soul is not getting what it needs. But again, with the qualification that this should always be checked out, because absolutely, sometimes you need both. Sometimes you need the spiritual intervention plus the medical intervention. So I stand by that. In other words, I agree with what you're saying, and thank you for making that point. I'm going to do 2 follow-ups, And then I see some of the things I promised I would do. I'm not going to do this week. We'll have to move it to next. President or Mr. Trump? Dear Rabbi, with all due respect, why do you use the term Mr. Trump? I never heard you say Mr. Obama. You use the title President or just Obama, but never Mr. Obama. Why difference? Thanks. I'm glad that people are medayik and are focusing on every word that I utter. I don't recall saying it intentionally. I don't have a problem saying President Trump. That's his title. I don't have a problem saying Mr. Trump. I have no problem saying Mr. Obama. I have no problem saying President Obama. These are titles that are legal titles. This is the title of the person that was elected. Whether you like the guy or not has nothing to do with it. So there's nothing to be read into these words. And it is what it is. So I just wanted to clarify that. And I'm not sure why it's bothering you, but anyway, there's no real difference, and that's that. There's nothing more to say. Another follow-up about the Rubashkin phenomenon. A good Devorah, Rabbi Jacobson. About the Rubashkin case, while all the jubilation over the Rubashkin release is warranted, at the same time we have to remember that there are many Jews still locked up in prison, and many more are in hospitals and state hospitals. I think we need to remember these people and visit them, even though it may not be a high-profile case like Shalom Rubashkin. You can't imagine the joy you bring a person when you come visit with hot food, etc. I also want to comment, when speaking about the Rubashkin case, you said you're not familiar with all the legal aspects of the case. Perhaps you should talk to Shalom Mordechai's lawyer, Gary Appel. I just listened to him tonight. He made a very good case that he is innocent and the accusations were libelous. I actually did speak to him. And not only that, I heard him speak at an event. That's what I was referring to last time I spoke about this. I said, I am not familiar. That's all I said. But there are people absolutely familiar, and it's very good to hear what they have to say. So again, thank you for your comments. And with that, we conclude the follow-up. There's more follow-ups, but again, there's limited time. I want to do something from the Chassidus question. And as I said, the things that we listed that we would do, always take more than I should take, and I will do next week. The Chassidus question is a follow-up about the issue of free will. And we have actually quite a few follow-ups. So last 2 weeks, episodes 195 and 196, we've been talking about free will, and as well as back in episodes 124 and 125. So I've gotten a few questions, and I'll read one and comment on it, and then we'll do the essays, and the rest of the free will discussion will continue in the coming weeks. Hi, Rabbi. I wanted to run an understanding of free choice by you to make sure I'm not off base. Based on Shara Pchira from the Mittler Rebbe, and he pasted the segment below. Okay, yes, here it is. It would appear that an individual does not necessarily have free choice at every point of engaging in an action. This would seem consistent with the Sikh in Parshas Vayera in Chelik Lamed Hey Lekutei Sichos, where the Rebbe concludes that chinuch is not min haTorah, that min haTorah, the time it takes for the bar mitzvah bocher and convert to be margil, to train themselves, to become accustomed to the lifestyle, is in fact part of the days of perfection. If everyone had free choice at every point of action, such period of transition would be unnecessary. Okay. He might, but might not as well. Going back, that person does not have free choice at every point engaging in action. He might, but he might not as well. The primary free choice, which is guaranteed always, is a person's nukudas hadas. That's the words of the Mittler Rebbe. Nukudas hadas means the spark or the point, the core of das, of concentration, which perhaps can be translated as worldview, attitude toward life, values, etc. Once you've adopted a worldview, you're accountable for whatever follows, even though some actions may have occurred as a result of your original choice of worldview and not necessarily the selection of the action at hand. For example, if a person says, my philosophy will be that intellectual pursuit is supreme, whatever it is, and this results in the study of idolatrous subjects, which results in him placed in a setting of eating treif, and does so even though he felt he didn't want to, the free choice didn't necessarily occur when he ate the sandwich, but rather when he adopted the value of intellectual pursuit at the expense of Kabbalah sale. This seems consistent with all is in the hands of above, save for fear of above. I've also heard that moyach shalt al alev doesn't mean that mind says don't do it and the heart listens. Rather, the moyach has to be constructed. The natural conclusion from the above would be that if a person wants to get the most value for their efforts, they should focus on what they're guaranteed to have control over. their values, worldview. Trying to control oneself at the point of action may be like flipping coins and expecting improved odds. Is this accurate? Thank you for your time. I would say it's partially accurate and partially not completely, in my view. Because at the end of the day, let's start with this. When a person's faced with a test, are they going to do something that's right or something wrong? It doesn't necessarily have to be with their worldview. They do have free will there. They have free will, as the Frierdiker Rebbe says in the Maimon Tovshen Ches, by Yachlem. The Rebbe brings in Lekut Sichos Chelik Hey Lech Lecha, that we don't have free will whether you're going to walk down this street or that street. But we don't have free will whether we're going to be born tall or short or rich or poor, or smarter or more emotional. We have free will when it comes to right and wrong issues. I need to look deeper into the Mittler Rebbe to see whether what you're saying has a point. There is, however, I would say, that it's correct to say that once a person puts themselves in, has chosen a certain perspective in life, what he calls the Nekudas Hadas, there, once you've said, you know what, I'm going to take this, let's say someone, I'll give a better example than I think yours. Someone chooses materialism in general. I follow whatever money says to do, that's what I do. Obviously, that itself may not have been initially an Aveda, but that attitude is going to lead to plenty of problems. Or a person says, more important than anything else is me. So that is the root of everything else. Then when they do something wrong, you could say it's a result of that. But to say that it's not the choice they make in the individual situation, it's only their life view and perspective, sounds to me cannot complete. Something's missing from there. That's how I would respond. But since you did quote the Mittler Rebbe, I looked at it, but I did not see enough to be able to give you, he says the following, you know what, instead of me just jumping the gun, I will look deeper into it and talk about this some more. But this is the first step of the discussion, and Hemshech Yaveh will continue more next week. Okay. Now, with that, we will talk about more free will as well. Now, let's do the essays. These are all essays still from last year. Actually, these essays are they weren't even marked because they did not really qualify, but since they were submitted, and so I will read one of them especially. And the first one is by Chana Perman, age 46, Toronto, Canada. She actually wrote a quite a humorous poem. Let me read it because we're now starting a new essay contest, so it seems very appropriate. Each year upon seeing MLC essay contest, I intend to enter and win. Well, can't I try my best? It's a poem. But the always knowing voice drones straight through my head. For God's sake, there be scholars whose wisdom widely read. One can't compete with those possessing years of wisdom under belt, plus the motivation of $10,000 gelt. And I don't really have the time for all the research entailed, and my painstaking circuitous manner deems me academic snail. There's a deadline. Well, we already said we're not going to use the word deadline, but it is used here, which will stress, resulting in contracted mind. I'll get a few thoughts down on paper, then straggle far behind. So the intention disappears, leaving in its wake the protection and full security of having made no mistake. Yet Chassidic teachings are for all, not in the sky, but close to you. Whether I enter the contest or not, I'm an ever-striving Jew. The greatest triumph achieved is shedding the shackles of doubt, absorbing the lessons of Chassidus, letting the godly soul shine out. As taught in Torah Meaningful Life, will save you thousands in therapy bills. Work very hard to succeed, all the while knowing that you are working to fulfill God's will. To apply the Rebbe's teachings in thought, action, and speech, asking oneself consistently, what goals am I trying to reach? It's not so much a contest as a lifelong aspiration and endeavor. The extent of its success, only God can truly measure. Now, I want to make it clear that even though it's nice, I'm using poem, but the goal here is to actually write essays with all these sentiments in mind, and I encourage this person who wrote this as well to write an essay, and it doesn't hurt to try and do something really good, and the $10,000 prize I'm sure everybody can use. So I use that as an opportunity to, again, plug and push the essay contest. meaningfullife.com/contest. The two other essays are one from the called Chassidus and the Arts by Devorah Eber, age 19, Brooklyn, New York. It's a short little essay that, as I said, did not qualify because it didn't follow the main guidelines, but it's always good to see people's effort about art and the interface between art and Chassidus. especially how the Baal Shem Tov taught it in looking at the perseverance that we have to have in each of the two. Okay, and finally the third essay, which is called Kabbalah Accommodates by Anthony Mallgren, age 32, Albuquerque, New Mexico. Albuquerque, New Mexico. And he writes again a very short essay about man seems generally contrary man, written, tell you the truth, I didn't understand the essay, to be honest, but briefly, he talks about Shabbos and a few other things in Chassidus, how learning the spirituality of it helps you get through difficulties and challenges. So there we have the essays, my friends, and with this we will conclude this episode 197 of MyLife Chassidus Applied. Everyone should have a Freilich and Chodesh Shevat, a month of Yefutza Meinesecha Chutza B'Shivim Loshen Ba'ayres HaTeira Hazeis, in all languages, both literally and also in the way we express it, in all forms and to all types of people. And again, I encourage you, this is the time, next 4 weeks, till Rosh Chodesh Oder, that is when is the due date for the essay submissions. Go for it, have friends help, look, discuss it with each other, discuss it, show it, and most importantly, follow the guidelines. May you be matzliach, and we will talk more about it in the coming weeks. Everyone have a blessed week and a Freilich and Chodesh. This has been MyLife Chassidus Applied every week, 8 to 9, every Sunday, 8 to 9 p.m. Be well.